Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back once again to my channel for another video in the Hall of Armor series. Now today we're going to be looking at the Diecast Iron Man Mark III. Now this was one of the first ones that I actually ended up picking up when I was going down this rabbit hole of picking up the Hall of Armor, and I have to say this is a gorgeous figure. This is probably my favourite Iron Man armor. Now, I know I say that a lot when I get new Iron Man figures, but I still think this is the grandfather of the MCU. It was the first film in the MCU back in 2008. It was the first film that I went and saw, and I think that this figure really just captures the aesthetic of that film excellently. Now, what we'll do, without further ado, you can see the packaging. It looks pretty cool, but what's even cooler is the figure itself. So we'll get all of the accessories laid out here, and we'll take a look at everything he comes with. So you can see what the Mark III comes with is pretty much standard sort of fare with the Iron Man figures. Now, we'll have a look at the base first, because this is something that I haven't actually seen before, because I didn't really end up picking up any of those older Iron Man figures. Now, being one of the diecast figures, it does have these sort of foot slot things. I think this is common with stuff like the War Machine Mark II as well. I never actually took the stand out of the box when I opened up my War Machines, but I'm pretty sure their bases were pretty similar to this. But you can see that the feet actually slot in there. There's some red paint on that. It's a bit interesting. But basically, this lights up. You can put some batteries in there. The batteries have long since died on this, and that's the same for all the batteries, unfortunately. I put them all in, and I'm not sure if it's the LEDs or the batteries. It's probably the batteries, but you can see that the light will just basically go around the edges here, and you can see that it says Iron Man on the front there as well, which is pretty awesome. Now, another interesting piece is this sort of twisted ab section. Now, this is something that they included because they made the controversial decision not to include any waist articulation. And this was their way of getting that ground pound sort of pose from the figure without actually having any articulation in the ab section. Interesting, and I'm glad that they've ditched that on future releases. But we'll have to wait and see what the Mark II diecast ends up looking like, because I'm not sure if they're going to have articulation or they're going to include that sort of thing. Now you can see the head. This is one of the helmets, not the one with the Tony Stark portrait in there. This has got the faceplate with excellent detail in there, and you can see it's one of the newer designs, not like that Mark II we just looked at, where the light's actually behind the eyes there, which is excellent. Now, he does have the pop-out little wrist rocket sort of things. I have one of these on him at the moment, just so I can show you a little bit of variety. Basically, that is slot in to his arm there as well. He comes with his flare sort of canister, which slots onto the side of his leg. You basically put it in and turn it, and that's what locks it into place, which is really cool. And then he has this little rocket piece, which of course he uses when he lands in the town and he shoots all the terrorists with these rockets. And this is the piece that just slots off that you eventually replace with that piece there. So that's pretty awesome. Now, the other controversy with this figure is the amount of diecast. There isn't actually that much diecast in the figure itself, but it still has that sort of heft. I'd say probably about 10 to 20% of the figure is diecast, but nevertheless, it looks really cool. So when we get the figure out here, I'll try and my best to point out which parts are diecast and which aren't. Now, he comes with a range of hands, but my favorite, as always, are these articulated hands, and they have the wrist sort of piece on the hand itself, which is cool. And they've got a bent version. So you can see that this piece of basically a single piece of metal looks like it has bended. So obviously in the CGI on the film, that's how they were able to recreate that, because in real life, obviously, a piece of metal could never bend to that extent, which is pretty interesting. But either way, what we'll do now is we'll get the figure out here and we'll take a look at the head sculpt. Now, taking a look at the head sculpt, this one is the one that includes the Robert Downey Jr. portrait just underneath the faceplate, and it can actually sit up on top there. Now, the jaw of the helmet is articulated like that Mark II figure, so that's a nice sort of carryover. And that's something that you really don't see in sort of subsequent releases of Iron Man figures. But nevertheless, the head sculpt looks absolutely terrific. Now, I'm going to try my best to sort of guess where this Robert Downey Jr. portrait has come from. I'm going to say that it might have come from the Arc Reactor Creation set, Tony, because it looks very similar. But I'm sure I will no doubt get corrected in the actual comment section. But you can see the wrist rocket, that's actually how it plugs on there. So the panel obviously removes and it just slots on there, which looks really, really awesome. Now, there are some sort of action features with the figure, and you can remove the chest plate, and that's part of, I guess, sort of like the creation sort of set. Like, it looks pretty similar to that. So the chest plate just pops off like that, and you can see the excellent detail just underneath the section there, which is quite awesome. Now, another section that actually removed, so I wasn't actually expecting it to do this, is this chest plate sort of section here as well. So you can see that the level of detail just extends throughout the entire chest section, which is really awesome. And I wasn't actually expecting that at all. I was expecting this to be sort of a fixed piece. I mean, even on the Mark II Armor Unleashed figure, that part didn't actually remove. So, you know, kind of interesting that they actually went that extra mile and did that, and it snaps on quite nicely. Now, he does have the articulated flaps in the back with these incredibly annoying silver pieces which prevent the back flaps from sitting all the way down. I'm so glad they have since gone ahead and ditched that. But just looking at the figure through the viewfinder, you can see that there's this incredible gloss throughout the entire figure, which just screams quality. I mean, even parts like this part, which is plastic, even that looks like die-cast metal. I've done a terrific job of just replicating that overall look from a plastic figure, just adding those die-cast bits in just to give it that weight. Now, I'm going to say that the bicep areas are die-cast. It doesn't feel like anywhere else in this sort of section is. But I'm not exactly sure where all the die casting is. I mean, the legs sort of feel like they're mostly die cast, and it's good to have that weight in the legs to sort of keep him grounded. But it does sort of make the joints struggle a little bit under the weight of the figure. But nevertheless, it's still an awesome looking piece. What I'll do now is I'll zoom down a bit and I'll give you a look at the rest of the armor. So taking a look at this torso section, you can see that it looks pretty sleek, and that's probably because there is no articulation at all. And when I say at all, I mean this piece is entirely one fixed piece. Now, these pieces on the back here are actually buttons to detach this midsection. Now, I've done it once, and I pretty much felt like I was going to break it. So I'm not going to do it here on camera, but this middle one detaches this part from the lower part, and this upper one detaches the top part, and then you can slot in that twisted sort of section to make it look like he's doing the ground pound pose, which is really, really excellent. Now, I wish they had actually gone ahead and made this fully articulated, and I'm hoping that the Mark II eventually does have that articulation when it comes out. Now, speaking of articulation, these joints or these pieces here are all articulated, so no pink panty sort of syndrome here. This is all plastic, which is good, no rubber pieces. And these pieces obviously are the flare components, which you can basically twist. These ones are really tight, so I'm not going to try and pull those off, but you can twist them off and replace it with those other sections, which is really, really awesome. Now, what I'll do is I'll zoom down because there is a little bit of detail actually hidden in the legs that I want to give you guys a look at. As with some of these early Iron Man figures, this does have the basic little bit which you can slot open to see some extra detail in the actual legs. Now, they actually stopped doing this for some reason on the newer figures, but you can see in there is a little bit of detail. Now, this bottom piece also does open up, so you can get some more detail, but they really don't open up very far. And this kind of is a little bit nerve-wracking because I do not want to break anything because these are getting a little bit hard to find now. But basically, they've included some of that little extra detail, and I'm really thankful that they have done that. Now, there is one little complaint that I do have with the figure, and it's that there is basically no ankle pivot. I mean, that is literally it. That tiny, tiny little bit of movement, and I see why. I mean, it's because of this panel here. But the Mark II Armor Unleashed figure that we just reviewed, that had more ankle articulation, so I'm not exactly sure why they weren't able to figure something out in order to get that level of articulation that even that Mark II Armor Unleashed figure had. Now, what we'll do is we'll zoom out because I want to compare this guy to the plastic Mark IV. Okay, so taking a look at the Mark III versus the plastic Mark IV, you can see that there is a little bit of a height difference. And you can see that this guy's standing in sort of a bit of funky posture, and that's because the die cast in the legs just prevent me from getting that really wide sort of stance that I can get on the Mark IV without him feeling like he's going to be toppling over. Now, he's also got that lack of mid-torso articulation, which prevents him from really standing up perfectly straight like you can do with the Mark IV. Now, you can obviously see the difference in the sheen and the gloss of the red paint on the Mark III versus the Mark IV. I mean, it's night and day. This guy looks like he's pure die-cast, glossy car paint sort of metal. This guy clearly is plastic. That sort of shimmer just isn't there, unfortunately, with the Mark IV plastic. Now, I have said this before, I do prefer the plastic Iron Man figures, especially when they're painted up like this guy, just because they provide just that, you don't fear for breaking the figure when you're articulating them when they're plastic, just because they're not so heavy that when you pick them up, the joints just go loose and the legs just fly everywhere. I mean, my Mark II War Machine is just a floppy mess, and the plastic versions of the figures that I have, I feel safer knowing that I can just articulate them. And it sounds a bit silly just because metal is so much more robust, but for some reason, I don't know why, I prefer the plastic Iron Man figures. Not to say that I don't love my Mark III diecast. As I said, it is my favourite Iron Man figure in my collection. I just prefer the plastic Iron Man figures. Just wrapping up on the Mark III diecast now. This is another excellent addition to the Hall of Armour. And as I've said time and time again throughout this review, this is my favourite Iron Man figure in my entire collection. It's basically the origin of the MCU. I mean, I don't know how anyone cannot love this figure. Just forgive it for its shortcomings, the lack of articulation in the chest. I don't think we're going to be getting a 2.0 version of the Mark III diecast, unfortunately, as cool as that would be. But basically, this is what we have for now. This is another excellent addition into the Iron Man line, and I'm so happy that I eventually ended up picking it up. I know I was a bit late to the game, so if you can still find him, definitely do pick him up. I know that Go Figure, I think, still has him in stock, and I think Pop Culture might as well, so definitely check out those sites if you are looking for those guys. Obviously, you can also probably find him on the Buy Sell Trade forum, so check that out. And once again, guys, thank you so much for tuning into my channel. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.